one. Hey guys, this is Cassidy from Fayetteville Public Library. You might see me from the reference desk. Hi. And this is Joel Doelger. Joel has worked for Credit Counseling of Arkansas for over 21 years. He currently serves as the Director of Community Relations and Housing Counseling at CCOA. Since 1995, nonprofit Credit Counseling of Arkansas has helped thousands of families with their personal finance issues by making a positive difference through helping people master their personal finances. And today he's going to help us figure out our student loans. Thank you so much, Joel.
You're welcome, Cassie.
And one thing I will notice, I will mention is if you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to put them in the chat. If there's anything really timely, I will bring them up during the chat, but otherwise we will save the questions until the end of the session. Thank you all.
Thanks, Cassidy. Always glad to work with the Fayetteville Library crowd. And though I kind of prefer in person, we live in different times right now, so we're willing to adjust and provide useful, timely information any way we can. But as Cassidy mentioned, I work for Credit Counseling of Arkansas. We're a private nonprofit who has worked in Northwest Arkansas for 25 years. And we offer not only community education like this, we also offer individual one-on-one counseling. So we help people work with building a budget, looking at their credit report and deciding how to improve credit. We offer a home buyer education class. We offer mortgage delinquency counseling for people who are struggling to make their mortgage payments. We do student loan repayment counseling now. So we offer a lot of different services. We help people who are struggling with unsecured debt figure out a plan for how to get back on top of things. And we're just continuing to work in the community to try and make people's lives better. We know that right now, a lot of people are struggling with student loan debt. I think the last I heard, it was like, there's a total of like $1.9 trillion of student loan debt outstanding, which is just a staggering sum. For some people, they can handle it. They've got their loans under control. They've got a plan to move forward. For other people, it really becomes a real challenging burden to try to make their way through repayment. And I know that the world of student loan repayment has a lot of obscure nooks and crannies that if you're not working on it every day, it's hard to get perspective on exactly how you tackle this problem. But that's what I've been doing for about the last 4 years in one role that I have at CCOA, and that's student loan repayment counseling. So let's go ahead and I'll put up the presentation and we'll go through this and begin. Oops. Okay, so I'll put this presentation on for several different groups already, mostly people just getting out of college, but some who have been out for a while. When I do this, when tackling the underlying problem, there are usually typical questions that people are trying to address. And those questions are, among the questions they have are, where are my loans? A lot of people have ignored their student loans for a while and they just don't know where they are anymore. And locating them, figuring out a plan to move forward starts with locating your loans. Second question is, what's the status of my loans? Are they current? Are they delinquent? Are they in default? Knowing what step to take next really kind of is determined by where your loans are right now. The third question people ask is, what options are available to me? Given that there are a range of repayment options out there, which ones can I choose from? And that's kind of dependent on the type of loan that you have, the type of borrower you are, how old the loans are, a number of different factors that we'll go through. And then people have to decide, given the range of options that are available, which one is going to be working best for me? Given the big picture, what's going on in my finances, uh, my income, my family size, my career future. All those things have to be kind of looked at to determine which option is going to be best for you. And then some people have defaulted loans. They're kind of in a hole. They need to figure out how to get out of that hole. And so dealing with defaulted loans is another issue that people deal with. Now, most people aren't addressing all of these questions, but you may look at it and say, yeah, there's one or two there that are really important to me. So the first question is, where are my student loans? And in order to answer that question, you got to kind of figure out what types of loans you might be having, because the world is divided, the student loan world is divided into government student loans and private student loans for a number of different reasons. So you've got these two broad classes. The government student loans, in order to find out where they are, the government has a student loan database system, which is excellent. You can go into the NSLDS is what it's called, and check on your loan status. But first you have to have what's called an FSA ID. If your loans are older, you might have had an older FSA PIN. Those PINs no longer work. You have to set up an FSA ID. And on my handout that I've put together that you can access, it lists resources on how to set up an FSA ID. The other way that you can find out where your loans are is check the mail that you've been getting recently. And that might tell you whether the loan is with a loan servicer, whether it's with a collection agency, whether it's with the Department of Education. Those documents will show that. You notice that I underlined the word servicer there, because there is some confusion about who the players are in the student loan business. I heard people say to me, I've asked people, what kind of student loans do you have? And they'll say, well, I have a Nelnet loan, or I have a Great Lakes loan, or I have another name of a loan servicer. The loan servicer, you don't owe the money to the loan servicer. You might owe the money to the Department of Education, the US Treasury that is. You might owe money to a bank. You might owe money to another player, but Nelnet, Great Lakes, those are loan servicers. Just like if you get a mortgage, you might set up a mortgage through Chase Bank, but then you have a different servicer who does the actual collection work, who keeps track of your payments and all. So when you're talking about Great Lakes, Nelnet, and the like, you're talking about your loan servicers. And that's going to be important later on. So in your government student loans, set up an FSA ID and check the National Student Loan Database, which is also linked on my resource sheet, and then you can find out where your loans are at. Private student loans, it's a little bit more of a challenge. You can check your credit report through annualcreditreport.com. Your credit reports are free through annualcreditreport.com. And right now, until March of next year, the credit reporting agencies are allowing you to pull your credit report every week for free. Normally it's just once per year, but right now all three are letting you pull your credit report weekly, which is a nice little benefit. You can also check your recent loan documents and from your private student loan, and that will tell you where your loans are at this point. So the next question is, what's the status of my student loans? Because you have to locate the status info and the different features of those various loans. Again, it differs depending on whether you're talking about private student loans or government loans. The NSL.
Hey, Joel, sorry, we have a quick question.
Yes,
will checking the credit report weekly, for example, affect the credit score?
No, not at all. It never does, not only in this time, but whenever you're checking your own credit report, that has no impact on your credit score. It never lowers it. Good question. In order to find out the status of your loans, you can go to the NSLDS website, and it's a little bit of a challenge to tell you how to work through that because they changed the website back in February. And of course, COVID hit in March. And once COVID hit, we weren't really seeing very many student loan repayment clients. So I only got a brief peek at what the new website looks like, and I don't have any student loans anymore, luckily. So I can't log into it and see it for myself. But it's pretty straightforward. And in the NSLDS website, it's going to tell you when you took out an individual loan, what school you attended, what the balance is, what the interest rate is, whether it's current, not current. So all that information is in that one source, which makes NSLDS a great site to use. If you don't have access to NSLDS right away and you want to get information on your loans, of course, you can go to the servicer or collector, any letters that you've gotten, or call them and get that information as well. And your private student loans, you would talk to your loan servicer, or if it's in the hands of a collection agency, your credit report might also show status of the loan, because on your credit report, it's going to list any individual debt, and then it'll indicate whether the loan is current, whether it's in deferment, whether it's in default, whether it's delinquent. So the credit report might also give you some of that information. So that's where you find out about the status of the loans. The third question is, what options are available to me? Now I know what kinds of loans I have. I kind of know what the status of the loan is. Next, you want to know what options are available to you, because even in government loans, if you've got a Parent Plus loan, a FFEL loan, a Stafford loan, a Ford Direct loan, these are all different types of loans, and they don't all. Each loan is not open to all of the whole range of repayment options. So again, dividing the world into government and private loans. You look at the NSLDS site and look up the type of loan status, type of borrower, how old the loan is, and loan balance. And based on that information, you'll be able to kind of predict what some of the loan repayment options are for you. On the resource sheet that I've put together for you, I give you a link to an explanation of different options that are available and what the qualification requirements are. In the case of private student loans, there just isn't that kind of flexibility. They're kind of bought as is. It's more like a car loan. It's more like a mortgage loan. You sign up for a given interest rate, a given term, and there's not a lot of flexibility in there. Sometimes if you're out of work, you can call the lender or the servicer on the private loan, and you can say, I'm really in a bind here. Can you put me on a forbearance or a deferment, something like that? And sometimes they will do it, but it's kind of out of the generosity of their heart. It's not a requirement like it is for the government student loans. So that's the options available to me, but I'm going to cover some of those options here. This kind of gives you a broad overview of some of the options that are available for government student loans. Let me give you them kind of quickly, and then we'll go into the detail on different ones. One is the standard repayment. It's kind of your default option, straight out of the box. And what it does, it just takes a term and then divides the payout of the balance with interest over that term. Graduated repayment allows you to start at a lower repayment amount and increase your payment over time. Extended repayment allows you to stretch out the repayment period. so that your individual monthly payment is a little bit less. And then there are 4 different income-driven repayment options so that your payment is not tied to the balance or to the interest rate. Instead, the monthly payment amount is tied to your income. So let's look at each one of those in turn. So your vanilla approach is the standard repayment. Generally speaking, it sets up a 10-year term to repay your principal and interest, kind of like a car loan in that sense. You know what it is, the first payment, you know what it's going to be the last payment. You know that it's going to last 10 years and then it's done. It's simple. There are certain advantages to it. One of the big advantages is that it saves you the most money, generally speaking, because the term is relatively short, the payment is constant, and assuming that you don't make additional payments along the way, it's going to be getting you out of debt the quickest. The big disadvantage, though, is that it's a pretty large monthly payment for most people, especially just getting out of getting their degree, or some people struggle because they don't get their degree and still have the student loan debt. So it's not a great option for everybody. Take, for example, what if you got into a profession where you were expected to suddenly develop a professional wardrobe, move to another city, you have to buy a new car, all these kind of upfront costs that you really weren't saving up for through your college career. So you know that maybe your career, maybe you're in engineering, and you know your career is going to take off at some point, and you're going to really have a healthy salary, but at the beginning, it's just not going to be there. One alternative is this graduated repayment that allows you, again, to cover a 10-year term, but your payments begin at a lower level at the start. And then each 2 years, the monthly payment requirement increases so that by year 6, your monthly payment is larger than it would have been under your standard repayment. The advantage is if you're in that position where you're not fast out of the gate in your career, you're not earning a lot of money, this allows you to kind of roll with the punches to begin with and get a little bit of momentum in your career in order to start up. The disadvantage is that it is more expensive in the long run as compared to the standard repayment. There's several kind of general rules of borrowing money. One is anytime you borrow money, anytime you use anybody else's money, it's going to cost you, right? There's usually a finance charge. Second rule is the more money you owe, the more it's going to cost you. So borrowing to buy a house means you're paying more in interest because it's such a large purchase. And the third rule is the longer that your repayment is, the more it's going to cost you as well. That's why 7-year car loans are such a bad deal, because even though your monthly payment might be lower, you're using somebody else's money for a longer period of time, and that makes it more expensive. You're going to be hit with more finance charges in the long run. So the slow start isn't great for everybody. And for some people, just the whole idea of a 10-year repayment is mind-boggling. The amount of monthly payments is just staggering if you're talking about $30,000, $40,000 of student loan debt. So the alternative to that is an extended repayment plan, where rather than limiting yourself to a 10-year repayment, you stretch it out to a 20 or 25-year repayment period instead. And 25 is the standard. Now, your extended repayment can be fixed, like the standard repayment, or it can be graduated, where you start lower and increase your payment over time. But again, it is stretched out. The big advantage is lower monthly payment, but the big disadvantage is a higher overall loan cost. And I've got a chart I'll show you in a little bit that kind of will display how much more it's going to cost you to use an extended repayment plan. So those are three basic options: your standard repayment, your graduated repayment, and your extended repayment. But for a lot of people, none of those three really work all that well. It's still a pretty tough lift to tackle that student loan debt. So if you got your art history degree or a degree in French, medieval French poetry, you might kind of struggle to cover those loan costs. So an alternative is the income-driven repayment. And actually there are 4 different income-driven repayment options. But what they do is they don't tie your monthly payment to the loan balance and the interest rate and the term. Instead, your monthly payment is tied to what your income is. Typically, what income-driven repayment plans do is they look at 150% of poverty rate for your family size. The Department of Health and Human Services determines poverty rate. They look at 150% of that poverty rate, and then they look at where your income is in relation to 150% of poverty. If it's above that, well, if it's below it, your required payment is actually 0. And each month that you make that $0 payment, you're still staying in good standing. But if your income is above 150% of poverty, that's what's considered your discretionary income. And what the student loan typically requires is 10% of the difference between 150% of poverty and where your income is. One of the plans does require 15% instead, but it's generally, the other plans, it's 10% of that difference. And I'll show you some examples that illustrate that. So your payment is determined as a percentage of your disposable income, so that if you're not making much money, you can afford to make your student loan payments and stay in good grace and not worry about having your tax refund held and things like that. The one risk, though, is you could end up in a situation of what's called negative amortization. So, for example, if your income is not particularly high, and let's say your discretionary income is fairly modest, and your payment requirement is only $50 a month. So you can afford the $50 a month. You can fit that into your budget. But let's say you've got $50,000 of student loan debt at 6% interest. $50,000 of debt at 6% interest means that your monthly finance charge is $250. So if you're only making $50 a payment each month, what's happening? Your loan balance is growing over time. And you might think, this is crazy. But the nice thing about income-driven repayment plans is that there's kind of an escape clause, usually at 20 years. So you make payments for 20 years, and what's left over is forgiven. So it gives you light at the end of the tunnel as a result. So let's compare some of these. So look at this chart. I've listed various repayment plans here, what the first monthly payment is going to be on those repayment plans, what the last monthly payment is going to be on those plans, what's the total amount that you will have repaid, and whether you get any loan forgiveness or not, how long the repayment period is going to last as well. Okay, let's see here. So for the sake of this chart, what I'm assuming is that you've got $50,000 of student loan debt at 6.8% interest, and you're earning $45,000 a year. So under standard repayment, graduated repayment, extended fixed, and extended graduated repayment, your income really doesn't make any difference. Your repayment amount is based on the balance of the loan, the interest rate, and the term. So under your vanilla white bread approach, the standard repayment on $50,000 of student loan debt is going to be $575 the first month, and every month thereafter for 120 months until the last monthly payment of $575. You borrowed $50,000, but you're paying back close to $70,000. That's the interest the finance charge that you're covering. And that gets you out of loan, and that gets you out of debt in 120 months. The repayment amount, sure, it's a little costly, but that's what happens when you borrow money. Well, let's say you're one of those people that is going into a career where your income is not going to be great right out of the gate, but it's going to grow over time. So you select the graduated repayment. Your first monthly payment is $332. Every 2 years, it's going to go up until the last monthly payment in year 10 is $996. So it's a fair chunk of money in that, but by then you're hoping that your career is taking off. The total amount that you've repaid, $74,000, but it'll let you get out of the gates and tackle the problem. You might think to yourself, well, that's all well and good, but I want to extend the loan. Rather than make it a 10-year repayment, I'm going to stretch it out to 25. Your first payment would be $347. Your last payment would be $347 under extended fix. You'd pay back more than double what you borrowed, but then you'd be free and clear of it. And then extended graduated, that's where you're stretching out to 25 years, but you're starting more slowly at the beginning. Your first monthly payment would be $283. Last payment would be $496. You'd pay back $112,000, and that would be paid back in 25 years. But I mentioned to you that there are income-driven repayments, right? Where your payment is tied to your income. Now, I'm assuming this person is single, no dependents. And so earning $45,000, that difference between 150% of poverty and where their income is leaves a fair chunk of discretionary income. And that's what your income is going to be, or that's what your monthly payment is based on. So one of the most recent income-driven repayment plans is revised pay-as-you-earn, or REPAY. In that, your first monthly payment is going to be $227. And then the calculators that kind of predict where your payment is going to be typically assume that you're going to have raises of 5% per year. So the calculator is projecting that in the last year of your repayment, you'd be paying $717. Now, if your income doesn't rise that much, that means your payment doesn't rise that much. This is just a prediction. But this is suggesting that over 234 months, you would have repaid $99,874. And you would be done in 234 months. You would have repaid the entire amount. Pay as you earn is a slightly older repayment plan. Income-driven repayment plan has a slightly different projection. One of the things that it does is it caps it at 20 years of repayment. And under that plan, you would have repaid $100,000, but you would have gotten some forgiveness of your loan, $3,700. Income-based repayment, or IBR, is a common income-driven repayment plan. The bad thing about the old income-based repayment, though, is that instead of 10% of the difference between 150% of poverty and your income, they want 15% instead. So that's why the more recent versions of income-driven repayment were a little softer. But you can see how this one plays out. IBR for new borrowers is essentially plays out the same thing as PAYE. And then there's a much older income-driven repayment plan called ICR, or income contingent repayment. And it's kind of an old dog. I rarely recommend people use it. It doesn't help many people at all, but it has a much higher payment, a monthly payment amount. The advantage is that because it requires you to pay more per month, you're done quicker and you don't have as much finance charge. But most people who are on income-driven repayment plans need a lower monthly payment, so it doesn't help them. So you look at this chart and you say, gee, I don't know, the difference between income-driven repayments and standard or graduated repayments, it doesn't seem to be all that helpful. The reason is, in the example that we used, the person had a relatively high income at $45,000 and had no dependents. Let's change that instead. Let's look at this chart again. If the person is only making $25,000 instead of $45,000. Under that scenario, these four plans are going to be the same: the standard, the graduated, the extended fixed, and extended graduated, because they're based on the term of the loan, the interest rate, and the balance. So your income doesn't make any difference. They play out exactly the same as in the previous chart. Let's look at revised pay as you earn. Okay, now if you're only making $25,000 a year, the difference between 150% of poverty and your income is much smaller. So that 10% of that difference leaves you just a $60 a month payment on your student loans. Now, predicting 5% increase in wages year after year, that means in the last year, your payment is going to be $413. You would have repaid $59,900, almost $60,000, but they're going to forgive $56,000. And I should add, when they calculate repay, they assume that some of your loans are graduate student loans. If they're all undergraduate, your forgiveness period comes up at 20 years rather than 25 years. So your forgiveness amount would be much closer to PAYE instead. Let's look at PAYE. Again, if your income is $25,000, your discretionary income is much lower. Your monthly payment is $60 a month. At the end, after 240 months, your last payment is projected to be about $300. You would have only paid in $38,000 on $50,000 of loans, and they would have forgiven close to $80,000. IBR, that's the one that requires 15% of the difference between your 150% of poverty and your income. So your monthly payment is going to be higher to start with and increase over time. But still, you're paying back $90,000 and they're forgiving $45,000. IBR for new borrowers is pretty parallel to PAYE as far as the terms. It's almost identical. And then you see the income contingent, the old dog kind of drags well behind and gives you no forgiveness. But when your income is lower or your family size is higher, that means your discretionary income is lower. And as a result, your monthly payment requirement is lower. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what your actual income is going to be 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 15 years from now. So you can't exactly predict where you're going to be, but this is still a lot better than not making payments and letting loans fall into default. The forgiveness is wonderful. It gives you light at the end of the tunnel. It gives you hope, because then you're not burdened forever and ever. I should mention, though, that currently the forgiven amount is potentially considered taxable income. So the year that your 20th year, they're forgiving $80,000. The IRS looks at it and says, "Oh, you were given a gift of $80,000 that year, and you might have to pay taxes on that as though it were income." But I've spoken to a woman, a tax expert at Legal Aid of Arkansas, and she says that most people who are on income-driven repayment plans can declare insolvency the year that their loans balances are forgiven. And that means that they're their assets don't match up to their liabilities, and so they can get the IRS to forgive that amount that is owed. There's no guarantees, but it still provides you reasonable light at the end of the tunnel. Okay. So which option is best for you? How do you know which to select? Really, you should go through a number of different steps. One is create a budget, figure out where you are right now. If you have no background in creating a budget, one of the services that we offer at CCOA is we'll work with you to put together a budget. We don't tell you what to do. Instead, what we'll do is help you figure out what's coming in and what's going out each month, and develop a descriptive budget about where you are right now, and then maybe offer you some suggestions or options about how budget could be changed in order to lower expenses or to raise income. We're not telling you what you have to do, it's just exploring options. But create a budget. Consider your career. Not only where are you at today with your career and your income, but given people with similar backgrounds and work trajectories, you might consider where your income is going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. And by doing that, you want to project your income, where it's going to be. And think about family composition too, because that's going to help determine what your disposable income rate is. More larger family size, less disposable income. The thing to also keep in mind is that if you're going to get married soon, your spouse's income on most income-driven repayment plans also gets factored in. The other side of the flip of that coin is the amount that you can afford to pay, or what's considered discretionary income, also is partially determined by how much student loan debt your potential spouse is bringing into the partnership as well. So you've got a lot of different factors at play. But one thing to keep in mind is you are not tied into a repayment plan on federal student loans. You can start out with one and then switch to another. You are not required to stay with a repayment plan throughout the life of the repayment. Now, maybe it'd be nice to have a decision tree to help with this. And in fact, NerdWallet put one together. Cassidy, if people want, if any of you want the slides of this presentation, go ahead and send me an email. I'll be glad to share it with you, so you don't feel like you've got to write everything down. But the decision chart that NerdWallet put together just says, here's your starting point. First question you might ask is, are you having trouble affording your current student loan payments? If you're not, stick with your standard repayment, get it knocked out quickly, and be done with it. You're going to pay less in finance charge. You're better off all in all. If you are having trouble, there's a determination of whether you have a partial financial hardship or not, as defined by the government. I don't really have time to go into that right now, but you could probably Google that and get the definition. If it's yes, then ask yourself, did you take your loan out after 7/1/14? If you did, consider IBR for new borrowers. If you didn't, did you take your loans out after 10/1/07 and another direct loan after 10/1/11? If you did, try pay as you earn. If you didn't, try repay. So it gives you a decision tree, kind of helps you think through what you're trying to get accomplished here. I mentioned that one of the services that we offer at CCOA is student loan repayment counseling. And so if you start getting overburdened by all of this, you could set up an appointment, and either I or my colleague, Bridget Jeffries, could kind of walk you through it. A lot of our services are free. Student loan repayment counseling is not one of them. We find that it involves a lot of intense work. Furthermore, we don't get any outside funding in order to support it. So the fee for the service is $150, but it does give you a year's worth of service. So most people we find come back once or twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times, and we'll see them as long as it's within that 12-month period. I have never had anybody say to me, this was not worth the money. We give them clarity, we give them direction, peace of mind, and everybody we've worked with has been pleased with it. Furthermore, we do have a fee waiver policy. So if you earn less than 150% of poverty, adjusted for family size, we will waive that fee. Okay. We've been talking about income-driven repayment plans. I wanted to kind of spin this out a little bit for you in a chart. And so in this chart, you see I'm listing in the far column how many people are in the home. 1, 2, 3, 4 people in the home. And for a single person in the home, what 150% or 100% of poverty, this might be a little outdated because I think I put this chart together a year or 2 ago. So it probably increased some. But 150% of poverty would be $18,735. Let's say this person earns $22,000 a year. That's gross, adjusted gross income. That's not your take home, that's adjusted gross income. The difference between $18,735 and $22,000 is $3,265. That's the disposable income. For the new IBR, the PAYE, and the repay plan, they all require 10% of the difference between 150% of poverty and your income. So for those plans, the annual repayment would be $326. That's 10% of this. Divide that by 12, your monthly payment on those repayment plans would be just $27. I said before that IBR requires 15% of the difference. So for them, the monthly payment, for that plan, the monthly payment would be $41. Let's take another household, a 2-person household, where for a 2-person household, the 150% of poverty rate is just over $25,000. And let's say that household has a total income, adjusted gross income, of just slightly more than that. Their disposable income is $195. That's for the year. So the minimum monthly payment is going to be just $20. That's 20% of that. And the monthly repayment requirement for that household would be just $2. Very low. Let's just walk through one last example here. Let's say this household has adjusted gross income of over $75,000. 3 people in the household. For them, that 150% of poverty is just shy of $32,000. So the difference between those two figures is $43,000. Government wants 10% of that over a course of the year. That's $4,300. Divide that by 12. The monthly payment requirement is $362. Under IBR, where they want 15% of it, the monthly payment requirement is $543. So I just wanted to give you a sense of how those monthly payment amounts are determined based on income, family size, and the like. Okay. Now, while income-driven repayment plans are very helpful, there are other repayment options that can kind of layer on top of your income-driven repayment plans that can be very helpful to a number of people. For example, public service loan forgiveness. You've heard the term, the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Under public service loan forgiveness, if you make 120 qualifying payments, that's essentially 10 years if they're consecutive, while you're working at a nonprofit or other qualifying employer, and other qualifying employers might be a local, state, or federal government. It might be a firefighter, working at a nonprofit hospital, might be a teacher only if you're working for a public school. I might add, though, if you're working for a private school or religious school, you would not qualify for PSLF. But if you make 120 payments and you're working full time at one of those qualifying employers, after 10 years, any remaining balance on your student loans is forgiven. And the cherry on top is that not only is it forgiven, but there are no tax consequences either. This can't come back to bite you. So, a wonderful potential program. I should point out, however, there's been some controversy with it. The program is about 13 or 14 years old. So, if you have to be under it for 10 years before you get forgiveness, you can see that not many people have qualified to use the program. And unfortunately, a lot of people at the start were not getting good information. Their servicers didn't train their people well, and so some of the requirements just weren't followed. For example, your loans cannot be old FFEL loans, and some types of Stafford loans don't qualify either. Now, you can take those loans and consolidate them into what's called a Ford Direct loan, because Ford Direct loans are the only types of loans that qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So you had people paying for 10 years on their student loans, never being told that they're not going to qualify. And then they put their paperwork in the end, and Department of Education was saying, so sorry, you got to start over. And it was really disheartening. There was some pressure put on the Department of Education, and so some people are being looked at again. But if you hear horror stories about public service loan forgiveness, that's why those stories emerged. Don't be afraid of it, but do be well versed in what are the requirements of public service loan forgiveness. One of the links that I gave you on that resource sheet is a document from the Department of Education that goes into public service loan forgiveness in considerable detail. And so as long as you know what you're getting into, as long as you understand the parameters and play by the rules, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Okay, Roselli, do you say that you were a teacher?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so
currently I teach at a private school,
okay,
but things may change.
okay. So there is teacher loan forgiveness, but it's not kind of across the board. Again, you have to work in qualifying schools, and that usually means low-income schools. And the amount that is forgiven is determined by what sorts of topics you teach. So if you teach like STEM classes, math, if you teach special education, the amount that you're going to get forgiven is higher. I think the maximum amount is $17,500. It requires that you teach in that capacity for 5 consecutive years. And the maximum amount that you can get forgiven is $17,500. I think for most people who use this program, the amount forgiven is closer to about $5,000. So by comparison to public service loan forgiveness, it's not as generous. You can use both, but not at the same time. So you could use teacher loan forgiveness for 5 years, get a certain amount forgiven, and then go into public service loan forgiveness. But that really doesn't make sense, because then you would have been paying for 15 years. Whereas if you got on public service loan forgiveness to begin with, you'd be done in 10 years. So I should mention that both of those also can be used in conjunction with an income-driven repayment plan. So if your salary is relatively low, as it is in a lot of nonprofits, or household size is large, you could end up with a $0 payment requirement for the first couple of years. And that counts towards the 20 years or the 10 years of required payments. The other loan forgiveness I'm going to mention is Perkin loans. Perkins loans are unique in that the money is given from the federal government to the individual school, and then the school loans it to the student. Oftentimes in Perkins loans, the school builds in forgiveness provisions. So it's going to differ from one school to another. So I can't tell you exactly what those provisions are. If you have a Perkins loans, dust off that paperwork and see what you've got going in there and see what it would require in order to get loan forgiveness under them. Okay. So up till this point, we've kind of been presuming that all your loans are of the same type. And frankly, that usually isn't true for most people. So we'll talk a little bit about consolidation and also talk about what happens if your loans are in default. Let's talk about delinquency and default, first of all. So your student loan is delinquent the first time you miss a payment. That's the nature of delinquency. But it doesn't go into default until you've missed 270 days, until the loan has gone 270 days delinquent. So, and once your loans go into default, bad things can happen. You can get judgments placed against you. You can get liens placed against your property. Your tax refunds can be withheld. You end up with bad credit. And you even can end up with toenail fungus and cavities. You can end up with toenail fungus and cavities even if you don't default on your loans, but just a word of warning, okay? Be careful there. So what do you do if you do fall into default? There's a couple of ways that you can get out of default in government student loans. One is what's called rehabilitation. With rehabilitation, you contact your servicer or the collection agency that might be handling the loan now, and you say, I want to get this out of default. What they'll do at that point is they'll typically quote you a payment amount to get you out of default, and you've got to make 9 payments within 10 months. But oftentimes what they do is they quote you the amount of the payment that it would be under a standard repayment plan. Remember, a standard repayment plan, the big disadvantage of it is how high the payment is on that. And so for most people, they would look at that and they'd say, that's crazy, I can't afford that. If that's what happens to you, here's the magic words. That's not going to work. I need an affordable repayment plan. You say those words, it's almost like abracadabra. And then what they'll do is the servicer or the collector will say, okay, what's your income? How much is your rent? They'll get a couple of your expenses, and then they will figure out a more affordable payment amount. I've had people who had rehabilitation payments as low as $5 a month. And that's something that people can afford. The one thing to keep in mind about rehabilitation is one strike and you're out. You can only use a rehabilitation plan once. So you don't want to get on a rehabilitation plan if you don't think you can make the monthly payment. You want to kick the can down the road for a while, unfortunately. Your loan balance is growing, but you don't want to fail at it. You want to make sure that you live up to that obligation of making those 9 months of rehabilitation payments. Once that's done, then you can get on an income-driven repayment plan and kind of move forward, progressing towards your 20 years and out, or if you're qualifying for PSLF, 10 years and out. The other thing I should add is that if you have defaulted loans and you have multiple loans, each loan is going to require its own rehabilitation. And that's important because $5 a month might not be all that much, but if you've got 10 loans, that's $50 a month, right? So just recognize that those kind of layer on top of each other. So that's the first way of getting out of default. The other is what's called a consolidation. You can consolidate your way out of default. You can use consolidation for other things as well, but it helps get your loans out of default if they are in default. When you consolidate these days, you turn your old loans into forward direct loans. And by doing that, it gives you a wider range of repayment possibilities. And also makes you eligible for public service loan forgiveness if you meet the other eligibility requirements. It's also more immediate than rehabilitation. That's the other advantage of consolidation. And there's benefits in that it's more simple. You only have a single payment. There's no cost to consolidation. It's not like you're refinancing. There's no origination fee or anything. And so it has a lot of advantages. If you're consolidating, I guess one potential disadvantage is that you might be extending your payment amount. And if you're not using public service loan or if you're not using income-driven repayment plan, that could mean more in finance charge. And there are limits on consolidation. So you want to time that correctly as well. Talk just briefly about refinancing into private loans. Some people look at their student loans and they say, well, I'm at 6.8% interest rate. That's a pretty high interest rate. If I go on the open market and a lender like SoFi or something like that, they're offering 4%. Why don't I just refinance into a private student loan? And that can be a useful strategy for some people, but it's useful for just a small number of people. And here's why. For once you move your federal student loan debt into a private student loan, you lose all those benefits of federal student loans. You no longer qualify for income-driven repayment, public service loan forgiveness, deferments, forbearance, all those things, poof, they're out the window. You're at the mercy of the lender now. You also, the only reason that you're going to get that low interest rate also is if you have pretty pristine credit. So if your credit score is in the 520 range, don't expect to get the prime rates. You've got to have clean credit. So it can be useful for some people, but most people, the kind of security blanket that the government has on their loans is a lot to give up. Okay. What else do I want to say? Okay, so I think that pretty much brings us close to a close. So we've got the key questions that we covered. Where are my loans? Kind of address that. Go to NSLDS. What's the status of my loans? Again, NSLDS is going to help you determine that. What are the options available to me? That's going to be determined by the types of loans that you've got, the status of the loans as well. And what's best for me kind of requires that you take a snapshot of where you are right now, assess your options, and then kind of pull out the crystal ball and figure out where your life is going to be in the future. I think that's one of the advantages of what we do in our student loan repayment counseling is we help you walk through those steps and kind of help you think through it. And then we just talked about defaulted loans and loan consolidation.
And we do actually have some pretty good questions in the chat right now.
All right, let's fire away.
Yeah. So are there any fees for early payments?
No, not on government loans.
Okay. Would it be worth it to get a home equity loan to help pay student loans?
Generally not. It might be determined by your individual situation, but here's why I would ask you to at least think about it twice. One of the advantages of a student loan is that it is unsecured. They can't come and take a part of your brain out because you didn't pay your student loan, right? But if you don't pay your home equity loan, they can foreclose on your home. And that could be a bad thing. So you don't want to, generally you don't want to turn unsecured debt into secured debt. The other thing about home equity lines of credit, you'd have to compare the interest rates to what your student loan is at. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a lot cheaper. Oh, and the other thing is, with a home equity line of credit, you don't have the security blanket that goes along with federal student loans, the forbearances, the income-driven repayment, and the like. So I can imagine some circumstances, but it would be it'd be difficult to foresee them. Go ahead, Cassidy.
Thank you so much, Joel. There is one more. Would it be worth it to transfer some of my student loan balance to a 0% credit card offer for 12 or more months?
No. I would not recommend that, because what your interest rate is going to be, unless you can pay it off within 12 months. If you can pay it off within 12 months, yeah, I guess so. You can save a little bit of money. But your interest rate after that is going to be upwards of 15% or more. And that could be tough to swallow after 12 months. And again, you don't have those, the cushions that the federal loan gives you. You can always accelerate your payment though. If you've got more money to throw at your federal student loans, do it, knock it out. For the most part, what I deal with in the counseling sessions are people who are really struggling to make their monthly payments. So we're usually pounding away at what different income-driven repayment plan would fit for them, whether public service loan forgiveness would fit with them, and what they're going to need to do in order to get out of default. But if you've got the ability to play with your finances and attack your student loan more aggressively, by all means, pay it off quickly. Sure, being out of debt is nice.
Great answers. So does anybody have any other questions that they would like to be addressed right now? Be happy to type them in the chat or jump on the microphone.
Could you please write your email in the chat or tell it to us, because the slide was so fast and I couldn't.
Sure. Cassidy, you want to put that in? Just joeld@ccoacares.com.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Do you find that helpful for your circumstances, Roselli?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Good.
yes. You know, I think we are always afraid of being deeply into that, but knowing that we have some options, and of course, we got this money to pay for school, and I think everybody out there, we want to pay it back. We don't want it to be, at least, we want to pay part of it or something.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing which ones will be our best options. And my situation is also, I think that, I'm not that young anymore, and you're going to have a student loan for the next 20, 25 years. I don't want to be, 70, 80 years old and still paying student loan.
Right. Right.
And I know my situation is not the same as the other people out there.
The other thing I might add is we know that a lot of people are struggling financially right now. Some are hit harder than others. But if you're talking to friends or relatives and they are having a hard time, make them aware of our services. Like I said, most, though not all of our services are free. And we pride ourselves in being non-judgmental. We're not going to tell you you did something wrong. We're going to tell you, here's where you are. Let's find a way out of it. And we'd love to get more people in the door right now. I think that a lot of people are kind of hunkered down, trying to figure out what's going on in COVID world and all, but we're ready to help. And
I've used CCOA services before, and I highly, highly recommend it.
Thank you.
I did the home buyers, first time home buyers class. It was back in 2008, and we were able to get like best interest rates, and it was just wonderful. So, and I know of some other people that get their credit card, that
a debt management program.
Yes, excellent services. So
Thank you. Appreciate hearing that.
And Joel, if you want to go ahead and send me the slides, I will go and send all of the slides, the CCOA website, and your contact information, just so everybody has a centralized area for all of that.
Fantastic. All right.
Yeah, this is such a great opportunity. I can't let anybody miss it.
Okay. Happy to do it again sometime.
Yeah.
All right. Well, take care, everybody.
Cassidy, I think you sent the email just to me. It was not to everyone.
Oh, privately. Thank you so much,
Yes. Thank you,
everyone.
Joel. Thank you, Cassidy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Okay, here is to everyone. And again, I'll send that out in an email too with the website link. So if you're curious about CCOA, you can explore.
Great.
All right, everyone. I guess we'll go ahead and sign off for today. Thank you all so much. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.